talking to us all about your dynamic maturational model of attachment and adaptation, which for short we call the DMM. And I know that you developed this at the time that any student of psychology who knows anything about attachment, they'll know the names of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, but that you were working with them at the time that you were developing this. I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about how your DMM model fits in with the way that things were understood by Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby, and how that work was at that time, at the beginning of the development of this.
Okay, I'm the second generation of Mary's students, Mary Ainsworth's students. So I knew her at the University of Virginia, the end of the 70s. And that was just when videotape was coming in. So none of her work and none of Bowlby's work is videotaped. I had the opportunity working under her to do the first videotaped Strange Situations, which was Mary Ainsworth's procedure for evaluating attachment. We have the first videotaped Strange Situations anywhere. I learned the procedure and I learned how to evaluate it directly from Mary. And this morning I was showing videos of mothers and babies that we call care indexes. Well, Mary's best friend, her academic soulmate, if you would, was John Bowlby, and he would fly over to Virginia a couple of times a year. And so when I was just a brand new graduate student, she gave me Bowlby for a morning in a little tiny research room, not bigger than what you and I have here. Wow. And we looked at videotapes, like the ones we saw this morning, for 3 or 4 hours while I was developing the care index. So what's similar? What's similar is the ABC patterns of attachment and individual differences. What's more specific but not different is my emphasis on all kinds of danger and threat, not just loss and separation, as organizing your self-protective behavior. So I took it a little bit further. But my understanding is Bowlby had the idea of danger. He just knew that the world wouldn't listen to that yet. So he talked about loss and separation. Mary Ainsworth had the ABCs, but she didn't have them in a circle like I did. And when I put AC together, I created a circle. And she said, I always knew these opposite patterns came together. So I had this wonderful opportunity to work with both. I would add one other thing. Bowlby set the model for integrating theories. He integrated evolutionary theory, ethological theory, psychodynamic theory, and then when it came in, information processing. And I've just continued to do that, pulling in more and more theories, but just following the pattern he set. From Mary, I learned to look very carefully at behavior. Look at the minutiae and then take them up and ask, do they repeat in function? Not in morphology, not the exact behavior, but the function. They gave me gifts that are invaluable.
Yeah. The fact that I was struggling a bit at the beginning when I was trying to say the dynamic maturational model for attachment and adaptation, I think that part where it says and adaptation is very important, particularly for those of us who are working throughout Latin America. Some of us are working in Africa in situations where the need to adapt is absolutely crucial. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit about how the DMM respects crises and difficult circumstances as opportunities for learning and development, which is rather than just as a negative to be put to one side.
I'm no longer focused on the value of being born into good conditions that enabled you to be secure and comfortable. I'm interested in the people who face challenges, which all of us will at some point in our life. Nobody gets through life with everything perfect. I'm interested in those people who find a way not only to adapt to the troubles they experience, but then to move beyond those troubles and adapt to safety. Where did it come from? I came from a very troubled family myself. So I've had to do the kind of adaptation that I talk about, living in a family that required difficult things of me, but then learning to live outside that family. My first real work was with families in Appalachia, in the hollows of the mountains, and so poor white trash.
Very poor people.
Very poor. Poor white trash. And with blacks, both out in the country and those who had come to the city. And this would be in the 1970s. They were very poor people. And I came to understand that even though I had been born in considerable wealth, and certainly good education, I wasn't any different from them. That we were each trying to cope with the problems we were given in our environment, and we had just our humanity to work with. And somehow that ability to understand how someone else suffers and their potential for growth made it possible for me to walk in to people who were racially different and poor, or culturally different and poor, still being middle class and speaking my lovely English the way I do, and sit down and talk with them. And the barriers went away once we became human to each other. But Bruce Perry said this morning, the thing you have to give is yourself. The thing you have to give is yourself. And it worked. That's where the adaptation came from.
Having people like you come to work in the places that we're working, usually staff from JUCONI, for example, we will be working in the poorest parts of the poorest sections of a country. And one of the things that's been noticed by people who have come to work with us is how very extreme circumstances clearly do have an impact, but the impact doesn't seem to be as great as maybe less extreme circumstances have had. The impact has been on people who have been in less extreme circumstances in wealthier countries. And I was just wondering whether you think that there is some kind of difference in the way that societies are organized where there isn't so much wealth that is beneficial.
I could respond two ways. One would be with the epigenetics. If you are having across generations the same kinds of challenges, that information about how to adapt to those challenges is partly carried epigenetically from mothers to their children. When a disaster happens in a place where it hasn't happened to your parents, you don't have that epigenetic information in you already. The other is cultural. Every culture learns across generations of parents what the danger is here, how you can tell when it might be coming, and what are the best things to do when it shows up. And we know this without there being words for it. It isn't spoken, it's known, it's in the culture. Every culture knows what the danger is here and how is the best way to respond to it. We pass that to our children by the way we interact with them every day, by the dangers we perceive, the dangers we alert them to, the things we say are the safe things to do, the things we think are dangerous. And when a culture has not changed in a long time, it's well attuned to its environment of danger. When something happens that's unexpected, that doesn't fit what your grandparents and their grandparents had known, the culture doesn't have an answer. And then you see this traumatizing response. What? There can be bombs here? Are you kidding? But in places where bombs go off frequently, you don't get that panicked response. So if it's a danger, no matter what it is, that has been seen here before by our parents, by our grandparents, we'll know something about it. If it's a brand new danger, we can be really distressed by it.
I think one of the most powerful things that you do when I've heard you talk now in a number of places is when you're able to provide a story, when you give us something that puts it in that puts it in context.
Yeah.
I wondered if you've got a story. It's not a story, is it? It's something that where you can contextualize where you've seen adaptation in Latin America.
Oh yeah, yes, it just comes. My first trip to Santiago was very soon after Pinochet went out of power. And I came over the Andes from Buenos Aires, noisy, confusing, things happening everywhere. And I landed in Santiago. Santiago was quiet. There was not a lot of movement. Evening came and people weren't driving around anymore. I was back in my hotel by like 9 o'clock. You looked around, there were uniformed people standing on corners. The people I was with had been in prison, and they saw every one of those uniforms, and their eyes were just like very, very wary people that I was with. Well, I've been going to Santiago for 15 years. People's facial expressions have changed. I know the same people. Their faces are different. Their bodies are different. We don't go out to dinner until 9, far less go back home at 9. The city's vibrant, it's alive. People adapted to the danger when the danger was there, and slowly, over several years, not immediately, they adapted to safety.
So interesting when you can see that over time, because these things aren't immediate, as you say. It does take time.
Certainly, my colleagues, they were in a free government now, but they didn't trust anything. And my guess is that they are still more vigilant about the potential of a dictatorship than would be Americans, who aren't vigilant about that at all.
Yeah.
We don't see that as a possible risk at all. But for a Chilean, it is. Even if it's back a little bit.
And I think that there's an important lesson in there, possibly, the time that adaptation takes to people who are trying to intervene in families, where what we're trying to do is help them to adapt in ways which aren't dangerous to the children, for example. And the amount of time that intervention takes, if we're really going to make that kind of profound difference to the way that people respond to each other and to relationships.
And a piece of it, I think, is being sure that the parents aren't in danger. If you want to remove the strategies for dealing with the danger, you need to be sure that we don't have danger. If the parents are responding to an ongoing threat of poverty, of violence, of not being safe on the streets at night, whatever, I was going to say whatever it is, but it's usually many things. And those things haven't been changed. You're not going to be able to change their parenting a great deal. The safety of their own circumstances have to change.